My friends, the world has never been short of devils. They need not carry pitchforks or smell of sulphur. They often wear fine suits, pleasant smiles, and the mask of reason. Evil rarely enters by force. It prefers the invitation of the half-open door. Evil, in its most dangerous form, does not stride into the room with horns or a roar. It comes quietly, politely, with clean hands and persuasive logic. The most cunning falsehoods are those that borrow the language of truth, and the most destructive impulses often begin with the appearance of righteousness. If wickedness were always ugly, no one would follow it. The ancient enemy has learned that men are not drawn to darkness itself, but to light that has been bent, light that flatters rather than reveals. Consider how corruption begins. No tyrant ever starts by declaring himself a monster. He begins with promises of order, safety, or justice. The tempter's craft is not to invent evil, but to distort the good, to take loyalty and twist it into blind obedience, to take freedom and stretch it into lawlessness, to take love and poison it with possessiveness. The most fearful thing about the demonic is not its power, but its imitation. It wears the uniform of virtue and speaks the dialect of decency. Thus, it is not the obvious villains who destroy societies, but those who convince others that the crooked path is straight. The moral blindness that follows is slow, almost tender in its deception. It begins when the heart excuses a small wrong for a greater cause. A man tells himself, "This is not entirely honest, but necessary." A woman whispers, "It is cruel, yes, but it must be done for the greater good." Soon the conscience, once sharp as a blade, becomes dull through repeated compromise. What began as a single bending of truth becomes a habit, and the habit a nature. This is how darkness grows, by borrowing the garments of light. One may observe that the most sinister influences are not always loud or dramatic. They can live in a jest that belittles the sacred, in a tone that mocks what is good, or in a compliment that feeds vanity instead of virtue. The demonic rarely attacks faith with open blasphemy. It prefers to erode reverence through humor, boredom, or clever cynicism. It does not destroy the altar. It only convinces the worshipper that kneeling is unnecessary. In the modern world, this subtlety has become an art. Evil wears the smile of progress, the robe of compassion, the mask of reason. It persuades the good man that moral clarity is arrogance, that truth is too sharp for polite company, that forgiveness is weakness, and that conviction is hate. Once a person accepts these flattering lies, the demon has no further work to do. The conscience will complete the task itself. There is, then, no more dangerous enemy than that which imitates the good. For the counterfeit coin always shines brighter than the true one when first minted, and it is only in the marketplace of suffering that its worth is revealed. When we are most offended by another's faults, it is often because they strike a familiar note deep within our own breast. We are mirrors more than judges, and what we see as monstrous in another may simply be our own deformity, magnified and walking on two legs before us. The proud man cannot bear the arrogance of his neighbor, because it challenges the sovereignty of his own vanity. The deceitful soul detests liars, for their presence reminds him of the unspoken falsehoods he shelters in secret. Even the self-righteous despise hypocrisy, not because they are strangers to it, but because they recognize its face in their own reflection. It is a subtle and ancient trick that evil plays, turning our attention outward, so that we may never look inward. The whisper comes, gentle and persuasive. You must resist the darkness around you. And so we draw our swords against the shadows that dwell in others, never noticing that the same smoke rises from our own hearts. The battle becomes theater, and in striking at another's demon, we feed our own. There is a curious satisfaction in condemning what we secretly envy, and a perverse comfort in identifying sin at a distance. The demon delights not when he is recognized in others, but when he remains hidden in us beneath the veil of righteous anger. The faults of others, if we would only see it, are instruments permitted for our refinement. They are mirrors held up by Providence, revealing what we have yet to tame within ourselves. A man's impatience with a gossip may expose his own addiction to speech. A woman's fury at the greedy may uncover her fear of scarcity. Every irritation is a form of instruction. Every encounter with evil is an invitation to humility. Yet we seldom accept the lesson, for it demands that we place the microscope upon our own soul, where the image is least flattering. The demons that work through others are not content merely to harm us from without. Their greater design is to awaken sympathy with them from within. When we respond to cruelty with hatred, we take its likeness upon ourselves. When we meet deceit with scorn, we begin to speak its language. The more passionately we oppose the evil in another without vigilance toward our own heart, the more surely we become what we despise. The contagion of sin spreads not only through imitation but through reaction. The insulted man who cherishes his wound becomes the twin of his offender. There is no demon more persuasive than the one who comes disguised as our moral indignation. He teaches us to believe that fury is a virtue and vengeance a form of justice. He convinces us that the destruction of another's faults will purify the world, though the only purification needed lies within. Thus the darkness we resist most fiercely becomes the darkness we serve most faithfully. To recognize this pattern requires an honesty most men avoid. It is easier to denounce than to repent, easier to diagnose than to heal. We would rather wage crusades against the visible than wars within the invisible recesses of our conscience. Yet until we have subdued the echo of the demon within, our victories over others are hollow. The tyrant may be dethroned, the liar exposed, the corrupter punished, and still the same spirit will rise again in us under a different name and a gentler mask. Every soul contains in miniature the very evils it condemns. They lie dormant, waiting for flattery, fear, or weariness to stir them awake. When we recognize the demon in another, we are standing before a warning, not a target. We are looking at a prophecy of what we ourselves may become if grace does not intervene. Suspicion is a counterfeit of discernment. It masquerades as wisdom, but it is born from fear, pride, or woundedness rather than light. The suspicious man walks through the world with his lantern shaded, mistaking every shadow for a threat. He trusts no one, not because he sees clearly, but because his own heart is dim. To suspect is to imagine evil, to discern is to perceive truth. The difference lies not in the sharpness of the eye, but in the purity of what lies behind it. The discerning soul does not peer anxiously into others. It listens, calmly and attentively, for the faint harmony of truth or the discord of falsehood. Suspicion begins with distrust, but discernment begins with love. Where suspicion seeks to expose, discernment seeks to understand. One tears apart the fruit to find the seed of corruption. The other waits for the fruit to ripen, and reveals its sweetness by its scent. The suspicious spirit is restless. It hungers for secrets, thrives on whispers, and takes delight in being proven right about another's flaws. The discerning spirit is patient. It measures time as truth's ally, not its enemy. There is a kind of blindness that grows from staring too long into the dark. Those who watch the faults of others too intently soon lose the power to see anything else. They grow clever, perhaps, but never wise. True discernment is born not of vigilance toward sin, but of intimacy with goodness. One who knows the light can detect its absence instantly. One who studies shadows will see them everywhere, even where none exist. The saints were never detectives of evil. They were lovers of purity, and by their love deception became transparent. Suspicion thrives in a cluttered heart. It feeds on envy, disappointment, and resentment, and each suspicion nourished makes the soul a little smaller. Discernment, however, requires space, a quiet interior uncluttered by judgment or bitterness. It cannot dwell in noise, for it listens for the still, small voice that speaks truth without accusation. The discerning person does not react, he perceives. He does not rush to condemn, he waits until his sight clears, for he knows that the fog within can distort the shape of what he sees. The gift of clarity does not descend upon the suspicious, for clarity requires surrender. The proud cannot discern, for their vision bends around the shape of their own importance. The fearful cannot discern, for their eyes are fixed on imagined dangers rather than real ones. Only the humble see clearly, for they have nothing to defend. They observe without anxiety, correct without cruelty, and speak truth without venom. Their discernment is not a weapon, but a window through which light passes freely. It is a peculiar paradox that those who most believe they see through. Others often see the least. Suspicion is obsessed with masks, yet it cannot recognize sincerity when it stands before it. It perceives manipulation in kindness, calculation in generosity, and hypocrisy in faith. The suspicious spirit is a parasite upon goodness. It cannot live without feeding on the possibility of corruption. Discernment, by contrast, is nourished by hope. It believes in redemption even while perceiving deceit. To cultivate discernment is not to become skilled in accusation, but to purify one's perception until it reflects truth as a mirror reflects sunlight. The clearer the mirror, the less it claims for itself. The truly discerning person does not boast of his insight, for he knows it was not achieved through effort, but granted through alignment with what is already pure. When the inner eye is washed clean of fear and prejudice, falsehood becomes self-revealing. Deceit cannot long endure in the presence of a mind that does not wish to dominate, and a heart that does not wish to be right, but only to see. There are few tools more obedient to evil than the human tongue. It is small, hidden behind the teeth, yet it can wound more deeply than any blade. A sword may cut through flesh, but a word can pierce the mind, the memory, the soul. Entire kingdoms have been ruined not by armies, but by whispers. It was not steel that betrayed the innocent in the garden, or condemned the just man before the crowd. It was speech, carefully shaped and falsely sweetened. The first corruption of the world began not with violence, but with persuasion. The tongue is the favorite servant of darkness, because it works invisibly. It leaves no stain upon the hands, no scar upon the skin. Its wounds bleed inwardly in the secret places of thought and dignity. One may smile while speaking poison, and the world may applaud the cleverness of the tone. Evil delights in this elegance, in the art of cruelty wrapped in eloquence. There are lies so graceful that truth itself seems awkward beside them. The whisperer and the flatterer are therefore honored guests at the table of demons, for they achieve more with a single phrase than a legion could with brute force. Yet words are not wicked in themselves. They were born holy, breathed into man when speech first gave form to wonder. They were meant to bless, to bind, to name, to call forth beauty from silence. But like all good things, language became vulnerable when pride entered it. The moment man learned to twist truth for advantage, the tongue became a double-edged instrument capable of creation or destruction, healing or decay. Every syllable carries a moral weight, though most speak as if words vanish after being uttered. They do not vanish, they settle. They take root in memory, in rumor, in the imagination of others. Once spoken, they continue to live, shaping perceptions long after the speaker has forgotten them. The corrosion of speech does not begin with curses or slander. It begins with carelessness. A jest that humiliates, a tone that mocks sincerity, a comment meant to sound intelligent but laced with quiet contempt. These are the small embers from which great fires spread. The tongue rarely leaps to wickedness in a single day. It drifts there through habit. Words spoken without mercy train the heart to think without mercy. A man who repeatedly chooses wit over kindness soon finds his mind barren of compassion. What began as humor becomes scorn. What began as honesty becomes cruelty disguised as courage. The demons do not need to silence the virtuous. They need only tempt them to speak wrongly. A single word spoken in impatience can undo the peace of an entire household. A rumor released in curiosity can destroy a reputation that took decades to build. And once a falsehood takes flight, there is no summoning it back. It multiplies, changes shape, gathers companions, and returns to its author wearing 1,000 faces. Few understand how deeply speech binds the soul to its own creations. Every careless word is a seed that bears fruit in ways the speaker will never see. Flattery, too, is a cousin of malice. The tongue that inflates another's pride may do greater harm than the one that wounds. Evil often works through excessive praise, through words that feed vanity until it swells to blindness. The serpent in the garden did not threaten, he complimented. The most destructive lies are those that tell a man what he wishes most to believe about himself. When the ear grows addicted to such sweetness, truth becomes intolerable, and the devil need say nothing more. There is also the corruption of truth told without love. To speak the right thing in the wrong spirit is to place a sword in the hands of a child. Many boast of their honesty as though cruelty were a virtue, mistaking bluntness for integrity. The truth, when severed from compassion, ceases to be light and becomes a weapon. The demons delight when truth is spoken with venom, for they know that words meant to reveal goodness can be made to destroy it, if delivered without grace. The wise therefore guard their tongues not out of fear, but out of reverence. They understand that language is sacred ground, that to speak is to participate in the power of creation itself. The one who learns restraint is not silent out of cowardice, but out of mastery. The fewer the words, the purer their weight. When the heart is unclean, the tongue becomes its mirror, and the corruption of one reveals the sickness of the other. Those who handle words carelessly do not merely betray others. They betray reality itself, turning the gift of expression into an instrument of decay. There is a silence that is born of fear, and there is a silence that is born of strength. The first hides from truth, the second guards it. The world, being fond of noise, confuses the two. It praises those who speak endlessly, mistaking volume for courage, and condemns the quiet soul as timid or indifferent. Yet, when words begin to rot, when speech becomes a contagion rather than a cure, silence is not retreat but resistance. It is the refusal to let the infection of malice find a new host. Evil feeds on reaction. It cannot live long in stillness, for its nourishment is movement, echo, uproar, continuation. The cruel remark dies if no one repeats it. The rumor decays if it finds no tongue to carry it further. The quarrel withers if the accused answers gently or not at all. Silence in such moments is not the absence of action, but the presence of mastery. It is the deliberate starving of the darkness that hungers for attention. The devil's favorite music is argument. His favorite silence is the one that denies him an audience. There is a deep discipline in restraining one's voice when provoked. The impulse to reply, to correct, to defend seems at first noble. It pretends to stand for justice. Yet often it is pride in disguise, wounded vanity calling itself righteousness. To speak when angered is to throw fuel upon the very fire one wishes to extinguish. The wise man does not confuse heat with light. He knows that truth, when shouted in fury, ceases to be persuasive and becomes merely another noise among the clamor. The tongue that waits until the heart is calm speaks with the weight of eternity. The tongue that rushes forward speaks only with the momentum of the moment. The kind of silence that restrains evil is not passive. It is not the silence of those who look away from injustice, nor the silence that shelters cruelty under the pretense of peace. That sort of muteness is complicity, not strength. True silence is active, watchful, discerning, and deliberate. It does not avoid confrontation. It chooses the higher battlefield. It allows falsehood to collapse under its own echo, while truth stands firm, uncorrupted by contention. The one who has learned to be silent at the right time has learned how to disarm the demonic. For evil loses half its force when denied the pleasure of conversation. There is an art to silence, and it begins within. A noisy mind cannot keep a quiet mouth. The chatter of inward fears and grievances will inevitably spill outward. Only the soul that has learned to still its own turmoil can offer a silence that heals rather than hardens. To hold peace within oneself is to create a sanctuary where the poisons of the world lose their strength. In such a person's presence, malice falters, gossip grows awkward, and hatred finds itself speaking into emptiness. The silence of a tranquil spirit is not an absence of sound. It is an atmosphere that suffocates corruption. To practice this silence requires faith that truth is self-sustaining. The impatient wish to defend every truth immediately, as though it were a fragile thing that might perish if not loudly protected. But truth is not porcelain, it is iron. It does not need constant polishing or explanation. It endures without applause. The liar's tongue works tirelessly because deceit decays if not reinforced. Truth, however, possesses the calm of eternity. To be silent in defense of truth is not to abandon it, but to trust in its invincibility. This restraint is not easy. The world tempts us with the illusion that speech equals power. Every argument invites a retort. Every accusation demands a response. To refuse that invitation feels unnatural, even cowardly. But silence is not surrender. It is a declaration of freedom. It says, "You do not control the terms of my spirit." When malice demands participation, silence is rebellion. It is the quiet revolution of those who refuse to become mirrors to another's darkness. The scriptures of human conscience have long understood this, that the greatest noise often conceals the greatest weakness. The tempter, knowing his own fragility, shouts to drown out his uncertainty. The truly secure do not need to raise their voice. When a soul is anchored in peace, it can afford to let the storm pass unanswered. The still water reflects the sky. The turbulent one reflects only its own confusion. Silence, when born of clarity, is therefore the purest form of speech, the word that transcends language. But such silence must be chosen, not imposed. There is a silence that crushes, the silence of victims too weary to speak, and there is a silence that redeems, the silence of those who have nothing left to prove. The difference lies in the motive. The coward's silence seeks escape, the wise man's silence seeks transformation. The former hides from conflict to avoid pain, the latter withholds words to deny evil the satisfaction of battle. The demon feeds on engagement, on the spark of pride, on the ripple of indignation, on the pleasure of the quarrel itself. Refuse him that banquet, and he grows faint. The most potent silence is that which follows understanding. When one sees clearly the futility of contention, the emptiness of proving superiority, the triviality of being right at the expense of peace, the tongue falls still of its own accord. Such silence is not repression. It is transcendence. It is the calm that comes when the soul no longer mistakes every noise for significance, when it recognizes that not every lie deserves an answer, nor every challenge an audience, nor every wound a reply. There is a peculiar arrogance in believing that evil can be reasoned away. The intellect is a fragile sword when it faces what does not think, but twists thought into mockery. Argument, though noble in its proper place, becomes futile when used against that which feeds on contention. Darkness delights in being debated. It grows fat on the energy of resistance. To wrestle with malice through logic alone is to enter its chosen terrain, where every victory is reversed and every truth is turned upon itself. The mind, unaided by love, may expose error but cannot heal it. The exorcism that endures is not a triumph of rhetoric, but a quiet radiance that makes the shadows retreat of their own accord. Love, when pure and unwavering, is unbearable to the demonic because it cannot be imitated. Deceit can counterfeit reason, mimic virtue, and even disguise itself as piety, but it cannot produce love. For love in its truest form is self-forgetting, and evil cannot forget itself. It is consumed with the preservation of its own will. Thus, to confront it with love is to confront it with something utterly alien to its nature, a force that neither competes nor yields, that neither flatters nor fears. Love rooted in truth does not argue. It simply stands, shining, and by its presence reveals every distortion for what it is. Such love is not the sentiment of softness or indulgence. It is not the permissive affection that tolerates all things for the sake of peace. That kind of love, though draped in gentleness, is hollow, for it fears discomfort more than falsehood. True love is made of sterner substance. It has within it the firmness of justice, the clarity of vision, and the courage to wound in order to heal. It does not excuse the liar but seeks to awaken him. It does not flatter the wicked but grieves for the soul trapped within his darkness. The love that silences demons does not negotiate, it redeems. There are those who imagine that to love one's enemy is to approve of his actions, to stand aside while he continues his cruelty. This misunderstanding pleases the demons greatly, for it renders goodness passive and permits evil to work unopposed. But love in its essence is not weakness, it is confrontation of the highest kind. To love the sinner is not to praise the sin, it is to refuse to become its mirror. The one who loves in truth meets hatred not with compliance, but with a light that unmasks it. He will not hate in return, yet neither will he call darkness light to preserve civility. His love has a backbone, his mercy has a spine of iron. This love disarms evil not by overpowering it, but by exposing its impotence. Malice, when met with hatred, finds something to feed upon. When met with indifference, it festers, but when met with love that does not yield to its game, it starves. The demon's delight is in replication. He seeks to reproduce himself in those he tempts. The liar wants to make liars, the bitter to make the embittered, the cruel to make the cruel. Love breaks this cycle, for it refuses to imitate. It answers curse with blessing, not as performance but as nature. It does not condescend to pity the fallen. It recognizes in every broken soul the same spark that once burned in the heavens before pride dimmed it. This kind of love requires clarity as its foundation. Love divorced from truth becomes sentimental corruption, and truth without love becomes icy judgment. One must never seek to love in blindness, for love that refuses to see cannot heal. It becomes a narcotic rather than a remedy. The demons know this, and they whisper to the well, meaning, "Be kind above all else." But kindness without courage is complicity. The love that exorcises evil must look straight at it, name it, and yet not become it. It must wound only to cleanse, never to punish. It must burn, but with holy fire, not rage. To possess such love is not the achievement of will, but the fruit of transformation. It comes when a person has allowed truth to reshape his affections, when compassion has been purified of vanity, when forgiveness no longer springs from condescension, but from genuine understanding. Only the heart that has seen its own darkness can love another without superiority. The untested heart loves conditionally. The broken one loves with authority, for it knows what it has been forgiven. The demon trembles before such a heart, for it cannot shame what has already faced its own guilt and found redemption. To love thus is to become an instrument of quiet power. One need not preach, argue, or condemn. The mere presence of such love alters the atmosphere around it. Those enslaved by deceit feel restless in its company, as though the air itself had become too clear to breathe comfortably. Lies wither when they meet it, for they can no longer hide in ambiguity. The tongue trained in malice falters, the eye accustomed to contempt looks away. Love, steady and unpretending, performs the work of 1,000 sermons without uttering a word. The great secret that the tempters fear is that no evil can long endure exposure to unselfish affection. It is not a battle of force, but of nature. Darkness cannot understand light because it has no category for self-giving. Love does not resist, it transforms. It does not defeat, it reveals. And revelation is its own undoing for the demonic, which thrives only in shadow. Love, anchored in truth, becomes a mirror through which even the most corrupted may glimpse what they once were. And in that glimpse, the possibility of redemption flickers again. We live among shadows, and often we forget that the battle is not against flesh and blood, but against whispers, distortions, and unseen appetites that seek to twist what is good into its parody. The demons we fear in others are not strangers. They are ancient echoes of the same darkness that crouches in every human heart, waiting for neglect to feed it. Yet the same world that harbors such danger also holds the antidote within reach. Every lie can be disarmed by truth spoken without venom, every cruelty dissolved by love that refuses to hate, every deception exposed by a conscience made clear through humility. The task before us is not to hunt for devils, but to become so inwardly illumined that they find no shelter in our presence. To recognize them is wisdom, to silence them is holiness. The tongue must be tamed, the heart purified, and the soul steadied in that stillness where malice loses its grip. Evil cannot thrive in the company of those who have learned the sacred art of restraint, the silence that purifies, the truth that steadies, and the love that redeems. If we would cleanse the world, we must first quiet the noise within us. Only then will the shadows retreat, not because we have conquered them by might, but because light once kindled needs no weapon.